Hello, good afternoon. So we're going to start the first and last panel of this afternoon. It's entitled Mobile Media and Public Communication, and it involves a paper, a communication from Professor João Carlos Correia. Professor Correia is an associate professor at Universidade da Beira Interior. He's the director of LabCom, the research facility that's hosting the project who organized the conference, and he's also a director of the Communication Studies Journal. His research interests range from journalism, including journalism theories, journalism and public sphere, political communication, including media and deliberation, online deliberation, cultural studies, media and critical theory. And the paper Professor Correia is presenting is called Mass Multitudes, Old and New Ways of Being in Public.
Thank you. Well, I'm trying to bring to the field of mobile devices some concepts of social theory. And those concepts, particularly concepts that are linked, that are connected, that are related with political communication and with the study of political activism in nowadays. Some of those concepts are very old concepts, such as mass, public, and more recently multitudes are very well-known concepts. I'm going to speak just a little about them, and after we will go to the problems that the use of these concepts rise to the study of digital communication and mobile devices. Well, the old concept of masses, studied by Freud, Gasset, Adorno, Canetti, Elias, Blumer, among others, seems to be vanished from the recent research in digital media, as if it was a primitive way of being in public. Not denying the social importance of well-structured publics with a clear agenda and rational objectives, one tries to bring to light the relevance of mass behavior that seems to be forgotten by some approaches. Simultaneously, one tries to identify emerging forms of sociability that act politically, with internal discussion and critical intervention. Nowadays, one assists to the rebirth of political activism. After the cynicism of the 80s and 90s, people seems to be awaking from political apathy, as the first years of the second decade seems to announce. The relevant question the relevant questions that one must to clarify is if those types of political collective ways of sociability may be used in traditional categories such as mass, public, or multitudes, or instead if the digital communication implies the replacement of those categories. Considering several ideal types of publicness in the broad sense of acting in public, one finds it as a strong, complex, and contradictory social variable, omnipresent in many different ways in humankind history and political identities construction. And a very well-known ideal type approach was conceived by Wright Mills. In a public, as we understand, in the public, as we understand the term, virtual as many people express opinions as receive them. Public communications are so organized that there is a chance immediately and effectively to answer back and any opinion expressed in public. Opinion formed by such discussion readily finds an outlet in effective action, even against, if is necessary, the prevailing system of authority. And authoritative institutions do not penetrate the public, which is thus more or less autonomous in its operations. In a mass, far fewer people express opinions than receive them. For the community of publics became an abstract collection of individuals who receive impressions from the mass media. The communications that prevail are so organized that it is difficult or impossible for the individual to answer back in an effective way. The realization of opinion in action is controlled by authorities that organize and control the channels of such an action. The mass has no autonomy. The mass has no autonomy from institutions. On the contrary, agents of authorized institutions penetrate this mass, reducing any autonomy it may have in formation of opinion by discussion. The concept of mass seems to be surrounded by suspicion. The concept will be sometimes elitist, others too literary, others too empirical and sustainable. Consequently, it will be vanished by internet studies, acclaimed as an ecosystem adjusted to enlightened publics. Generally, in social sciences, mass is described and marked by anonymity, uniformity, and conformity. Is described as potentially fanatical and framed by the lowest common denominator. It gives expression to unconscious motives, reinforced by the cumulative character and circular and reciprocal excitation. Mass critique became suspicious of being conceptually impressionist because of its somewhat apocalyptic tone, nourished by artistic approach. The capitalist urbanization, social locus of modern masses appearance is a strong sociological background, represented in all its aspects in music, literature, and cinema. In what is related with mass behavior, one may well think in the London street maps of Dickens, in the mass surveillance present in Kafka and Orwell, or in the dehumanization previewed by Chaplin in modern times, for instance, Jacques Tati in Playtime, or King Victor in The Crowd. Masses are indeed well documented in literature, movies, philosophy, and human sciences. A winner of the Nobel Prize of Literature wrote one of the 20th century major essays on mass. I'm referring to Elias Canetti. It's really worthy to reading some quotations where the accuracy of the scientist is enhanced by the expertise of the literary observer. Within the crowd, says Canetti, there is absolute equality. This is absolute and indisputable, and never questioned by the crowd itself. Some other quotations define the crowd by his love, by reciprocal excitement, is what we are seeing here, speaking on the reciprocal excitement of dance. In the rhythmic crowds, on the other hand, for example, the crowd of the dance, density and equality coincide from the beginning. Everything here depends on movement. All the physical stimuli involved function in the predetermined manner and are passed when from retreat and from one dancer to another. Density is embodied in the formal recurrence of retreat and approach. Equality is manifest in movement themselves. Each one of these schools of thought are indeed enough complex to be studied with some careful use, because they are not just garbage from a history of ideas. For instance, Benjamin understood the changes on reception brought by cinema and radio. And Horkheimer, Benjamin, or Adorno made some impressive foresights on populism, propaganda, estatization of politics, and return of some ritual dimensions of institutional politics. Time does not affect the accuracy of classics. Riesman theorized the other directly theoretical type. Just 4 years ago, Sherry Turkle used again this concept in Alone Together, applying it to mobile devices. Finally, all these authors have sharp intuitions concerned with the future of politics in what is related with media. Our question thus is the following. Will the concept of mass be useful to understand some digital behaviors, some behaviors that appears under the influence of digital communication and mobile devices? Just a minute, please. During the first years of the most recent stage of financial globalization, a blanket of apathy, cynicism, and technological euphoria have fallen under politics. In the late 90s, the most influential discourse was techno-libertarian ideology, wherein converged elements of underground culture and neoliberal discourse. This culminated in a political project of economical and societal regulation known as New Economy, deeply focused on market regulatory imperatives. A mix of social cybernetics, digital Darwinism, and neoliberal economic theory compounded this political and economical project. Those elements were added to the praise of individual freedom, entrepreneurship, and creative innovation. The dominant perception of politics, particularly among youngsters, seem to be identified with the world of technocracy, efficiency, or realpolitik, but also with corruption and abuse of power. Another way pointed by Sloterdijk, for instance, will be a spontaneous form of humorous cynicism as a critical strategy of political distance. Such points of view, with a strong disbelief in politics, may well remind us with proper reserves the latent distrust on words and values taken for granted, such as modern values, such as democracy, reason, and so. Sloterdijk claims today, and he was speaking in the end of the 90s, the cynic appears as a mass figure, an average social character in the upper echelons of the elevated superstructure. That was in those times, the zeitgeist. Since 2008, Europe knows an unprecedented change marked by widespread insecurity. On this background of uncertainty, hundreds of thousands of young people joining groups against youth unemployment and austerity measures. Those movements are just now crossing Europe and influencing elections and governments. They are often identified with the new social movements, displaying particular features adjusted to particular contexts. Decreasing social mobility, reaching a generation of middle-class youth distinguished by the use of culture and technological skills, proletarianization of qualified persons, endowed with culture capital and creativity, circulation of media platforms adjusted to more flexible forms of public intervention, proliferation of new discourses sensible to various forms of collaborative expression in digital media. Meanwhile, a new time for some thinkers was arriving after the defeat of the fight, after the triumph of the weak socked. I'm quoting now Negri. New kinds of movements were arriving, being their future in Negri socked the construction of a web of movements. The multitude will become global, a multiplicity of singularities already mixed, capable of immaterial and intellectual labor, with an enormous power of freedom. Many thinkers thought that digital devices emerging with the Web 2.0 and social networks were the protagonists of an ideal narrative of democratic participation. The concept of mass and mass media will become obsolete. Others believe that internet and social networks, together with mobile devices, exhibited many of the features of the traditional concept of masses. The skeptical approach claims that one cannot neglect the social and political components of power over the media system, including the internet. In fact, this perspective is going together with an idealized vision of the political and economic power structures that cross social networks. Secondly, the participation of audiences does not necessarily mean the increasing of citizenship quality. A tendency towards conformity generated polarizing effects that increase the possibilities for people to dismiss alternative points of view. Finally, social networks with their causes and thematic groups are maybe being responsible for a fragmented environment with negative impacts on rational and democratic dialogue. One must also face the fact that the disclosure of personal information in social media and phenomena such as surveillance and data surveillance are highly valuable to economy and politics. The domestication of bodies and behaviors is statistically relevant for an economy increasingly dependent on immaterial concepts such as memory, culture, identity. Additionally, one must consider the critical importance of understanding what does objectively means the autonomy of public discourse inside global platforms of social network strongly dependent on global major corporations, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and many others. Also, many scholars take into account the permanent and ubiquitous connection established among individuals, making themselves more dependent on preconceptions dominant in communities to which they belong. The adoption of this point of view includes the suspicion of a social regression induced by new media due to the retribalization of social world, radicalized by internet. In spite of allowing access to a huge diversity of contents, some research, such as António Fidalgo, show that users, where they are, often remain confined themselves to their private world. To those skeptical approach, I add a new concept, the concept of mobile masses. Digital culture, it's a culture of speedness, of velocity. If the drag of counterculture was LSD, the drag of cyberculture would be amphetamine, quoting Gibson. Increasing speed and acceleration are related with the needs of capitalist accumulation. It is not by chance that either Marx in the 19th century, either Iver on the 21st century, both reflected on the annihilation of space by time. The driving force of the so-called information and knowledge society, it is an almost bulimic search for new markets by capitalist funds. Castells alert us to the localities emptied of its geographical, cultural, and historical meanings. Living slowly means to be committed with our own present, means to live in places that has geographical, historical, and cultural dimensions. But the time where we live now is no more the time of experience. Masses are a product from urbanization, and urbanization cannot be explained without changes in communication and transportation. Well, quoting Arendt, how much bigger is the distance between the man and his environment, his world and his earth, more the man will be able to observe and measure, but less mundane space will remain to himself. The omnipresence of significant others is an expression of a frenetic need of hyper-sociability. Money is time. However, the increasing mobility also shapes the activism, opening the way to a globalization of movements that can be classified as multitudes. Urban cosmopolises are full of liquid multitudes ready to act. Brazil riots, March 11 in Portugal, started quickly, and the computer's click was often the signal to come to the streets. Supporters of this point of view argue that Web 2.0 and mobile devices allow social movements to build support through their own websites without constraints, empowering social movements groups to produce their own ideas, new agendas, discursive practices, strategies, tactics, indeed their identity, and generating a phenomenon of cyber activism. Some media theorists talked about technopolis, a term used by movements that fight by digital means the neoliberal hegemony. Some of those theorists recover the old concept of tactical media, meaning the use of the do-it-yourself media or self-media by groups and individuals who feel excluded from public dialogue and hegemonic culture. One must not forget the prophetical beginning of The first signs of next shift began to reveal themselves to me on a spring afternoon in the year 2000, says Howard Reingold. That was when I began to notice people on the streets of Tokyo staring at their mobile phones instead of talking to them. The sight of this behavior, now commonplace in much of the world, triggered a sensation I had experienced a few times before, the instant recognition that the technology is going to change my life in a way I can scarcely imagine. To all this, we must add some changes in the very nature of the power. All this is happening in a world where the nature and functions of power are changing, according with a common diagnosis shared of Marxist philosophers such as Tony Negri, or by former chairs of the World Bank as Moisés Naim, that recently published the book The End of Power. Moisés Naim stands, the quotation that you may see now, we know that power is shifting from brown to brain, from north to south and west to east, from old corporates, behemoths to agile startups, from entrenched dictators to people in town squares and cyberspace. But to say that power is shifting from one continent or country to another, or that is dispersing among many new players, is not enough. Power is undergoing a far more fundamental mutation that has not been sufficiently studied. And that is, even as rival states, companies, political parties, social movements, and institutions or individual leaders fight for power as they have done before throughout the ages, power itself is slipping away. Power is decaying. To put it simple, power no longer buys as much as it did in the past. In the 21st century, power is easier to get, harder to use, and easier to lose. There are some similarities with the thoughts of Negri and Hart in Empire, declining sovereignty of nation-states, and their increasing inability to regulate economic and cultural exchanges is in fact one of the primary symptoms of the coming of empire. The sovereignty of nation-states was the cornerstone of the imperialisms that European powers constructed throughout the modern era. By empire, however, we understand something altogether different from imperialism. The boundaries defined by the modern system of nation-states were fundamental to European colonialism and economic expansion. The territorial boundaries of the nation delimited the center of power from which rule was exerted over external foreign territories through a system of channels and barriers that alternately facilitated and obstructed the flows of production and circulation. But the passage to empire emerges from the twilight of modern sovereignty. In words very different and with very different starting points, they are both saying that tradition power is losing its strength, is losing what is potential, to use the words of Negri. In spite of the ideological and philosophical roots of both statements being completely different, in the end, even opposite in their essence, both identify something similar, expressed in notions of diversity and interdependence. Traditional power is lowering its potential. Facing the question in this paper, some conclusions seem important, bearing in mind further work. Traditional sociability forms, in its many expressions, either masses, publics, or multitudes, have different compositions where rationality and passions are more or less present in different levels. Those multiple expressions of different rationality are an anthropological constant feature of human sociability, are not an abstract reality distant from concrete human life. The digital communication is no exception. This means an epistemic difficulty to the building of an ideal type without giving voices to the social sector, that expresses by these forms of sociability. I'm sorry? Yeah, okay. Following Weber, Geertz, or Taylor, that problem goes directly to the core problem of subjective meaning of action, in this case, of the political action. It's impossible to access, it's impossible to evaluate without listening the voices that are collectively creating and recreating the dynamic and never-ending ties of political action. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Professor Correia, for your excellent presentation.